Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello and welcome to Creative Piecemeal. I'm Tammy Takeishi. Today I'm with pianist Emile Pandolfi. With more than 500 million streams across platforms, including Pandora, Spotify, and Apple Music, he ranks among America's most popular piano artists. Although the majority of his performance repertoire is lush, intricate arrangements of Broadway and pop standards, his influences are in fact more classical than pop. I really encourage you listeners, if you're wanting some relaxing music or taking some self-care time and needing a new playlist, to please check out Emile. I've really enjoyed adding him to my playlists as well. And welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. We're going to start off with who or what inspired you to become a musician.
That's interesting because I never thought about doing anything else. And from my earliest memories, there was always a piano in the house, but there was a piano in everybody's house at that time, really. And whether you played it or took lessons, it was still there. You had a couch, a radio, not even a TV yet. I'm very old. I'm really old. But you had a piano. It was the most natural thing to do, to pick out a tune or two. And we all started lessons. There were 5 siblings. We all started lessons at age about 4 or 5. I probably was 5 when I took my first lessons. But before that, my earliest memory is grandma saying, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And I said, "I'm going to play the piano." And it wasn't like I was a prodigy or anything. It was just the most natural thing to do. And there has never been one moment in my life that I thought of doing anything else as a full-time career. I've had other jobs, certainly, because I had to pay the rent, but I always knew I was going to play the piano. So there wasn't a moment that I was inspired to do music. It was just here I am, I guess I play piano.
Nice. I know some of my guests have said similar things like, well, it just came naturally and I couldn't think of doing anything else. And it really worked out. And you've recently written a book. It's widely available and it is called Play It Like You Mean It, Supercharge Your Playing and Let the Piano Work for You. Can you tell the listeners a little bit more about that and where they can purchase it?
That book is about, is what the title says, Play It Like You Mean It. It's encouraging people to be their authentic selves. And some of us sort of do that intuitively, and some wish they could and don't know how to approach it. And this book hopes that you can get the emotional content of what you have to say across to your listener. So there are a whole lot of not just tricks of the trade, there are ways to change your mindset so that you put more of yourself into your music. And as far as doing it there are chapters on career as well, because you do have to make a living. And I've been making my living my entire life with music. There's never been a time I didn't play music for a living, even though I've had other jobs for a very few years, like maybe in my lifetime, maybe 5 years, and the other 45 have been music exclusively. Oh, it's available on wherever you buy books, like Amazon, Goodreads, Kobo, those places.
Great. I'll make sure to include a link in the show notes. We're going to jump back into the questions here. What is something about you that most people who are familiar with your work would not know?
Well, they may not know that I have a very enthusiastic hobby. I'm a magician. I'm very much an amateur, but I've performed on stage from time to time. And when I lived in Los Angeles, I became a member of the Magic Castle, which is it's a pretty exclusive magicians club. You have to audition for, and I did that. I do sleight of hand magic, for fun and as an amateur.
Oh,
And then,
nice.
yeah, it's really something I just very much enjoy because particularly sleight of hand, I enjoy love watching big illusions, but I like what you can do with your hands with a normal deck of cards and some coins right there. And it's the technique. I think it comes from having so much classical technique at the piano that I really enjoy practicing.
Yeah, it definitely takes a lot of dexterity for sure.
Yeah.
And patience, which also music and piano take.
And
So-
it's a pretty art form. I think the first thing I ever did was learn to make a fan with the cards, and I thought that was such a pretty thing. And the sleight of hand is very pretty.
What got you interested in sleight of hand? Do you have an interest in magicians?
Well, when I was working, again, I was in LA for 15 years. During 6 of those years, I was the house pianist at the place called the Comedy Store. For some reason, a lot of comics have a deck of cards in their hands, or they're playing, or they do some little bit of magic. And I got fascinated by it, and I asked around, would you help me learn something? And to be honest, the job of piano playing at the Comedy Store was mostly sitting, because they'd say, here's whoever, the artist, and I'd play him on the stage, and then they do a 20-minute set. Well, I just sit in the dark corner by the piano, and then I play them off the stage and play off the next one. And I was there from 7:30 in the evening till 2 a.m. 6 nights a week. So all during that time, I had a deck of cards in my hands, and I had gotten some books that were recommended to me, and I learned. I had plenty of time to do it because.
That sounds like such an interesting gig. Does that mean you're also a fan of comedy?
Yes, I love comedy, and I have a lot of humor in my show. While I was there all those years, again, it was a long time ago. I was there from 78 to 83. And some of the as yet undiscovered comics were Jerry Seinfeld and Jay Leno and David Letterman and Robin Williams and Jim Carrey and Stephen Wright. And so there were a whole lot of people that many of them became superstars, but hundreds of them that didn't were still really, really good. And I just studied. I'm a student, and I studied how they did comedy and why it was funny and why somebody crashed and burned and why somebody was a super, not a superstar because that's marketing, but why somebody was really successful. And so in my own show, I have a lot of my own comedy. I mean, I write my own comedy, but I just think that performing beautiful music and giving a little palate cleanser in between is a nice combination.
That sounds like it was a wonderful experience for you, not only as a pianist to just get out there and try something new, meet new people, but also just a wonderful treasure, since you are such a fan of comedy, to see those artists in their early days.
Yeah, it was wonderful. And some of that time was playing improv for the Comedy Store Players, they were called. And some of the time Robin Williams was one of the Comedy Store Players. And to watch people with so many brilliant ideas so fast and play piano behind it, it was great fun.
It's always interesting to hear what people in the music field are able to do, because people are always like, oh, do you teach? Well, sure, people teach, but like you're performing, you arrange, you've written a book, you've been able to play in some really fun venues. And, I think that's a good thing to point out to listeners, that you're never really boxed in when you go into the creative arts. You're really only limited to yourself and what you're comfortable putting yourself out there for.
Thank you for saying that. I think that's very helpful for a lot of people. And looking at your site, I see you have several very enthusiastic interests with the culinary part and the photography and so forth. And why not? But I think as a pianist, you can be a solo player. You don't have to be in a band. So I've been a solo player almost my entire life. I've been in a few bands, but never a particularly long time. But there were so many ways you can do it. And I have a whole section of the book that talks about the fact that yeah, you have to make a living, and there's nothing in the world wrong with. I was a janitor for a while, and I was a house painter for a short while. I hated that job. That was awful. I preferred being a janitor, but I also preferred paying the rent, you know? So, and I did usually when you have a musical job, very often it's at night. So there's plenty of time for a day job, and plenty of people do both. And then you kind of find your footing, find your way around. But anyway, there's a lot of that in the book. I'm just mentioning that because I think it could be genuinely helpful. It's more of a holistic view. It's not, there's tons of information online that people can find, but this is a holistic view about how you approach as a mindset what you are doing with your life as a musician. It's more of a philosophy.
Yeah, it sounds so interesting, and I've added it to my pile, so I can't wait to dig into it. Obviously, you've played piano since you were young, but do you dabble in any other instruments?
No, I never have. Every now and then I've tried, not really, I didn't really sincerely try organ or synthesizer, but I have a synthesizer and I have a couple of electric pianos and things. And I sometimes try some writing on them, but I'm just an acoustic piano guy. It's so natural for me. And even no other, in college you had to take other instruments. So I took harp and I took violin because they both fascinated me, but I took a semester of each or something. I have two of my three sisters are professional violinists. So I grew up playing, we were playing together. And so it was just part of life, but I never had any interest in seriously taking up another instrument. I see you're interested in ukulele. That sounds like fun.
And that's okay though. It just means you found your instrument early on and that was it.
That's pretty true. I mean, it's just the most natural thing for me to do.
When you play piano, are there favorite pieces that you like or that you enjoy playing just for yourself, not necessarily for an audience?
Yes, when I'm playing for myself, I get out the music of Rachmaninoff or Chopin, mostly Chopin. And Debussy, I noticed you start with the arabesque, pretty arabesque. You start your podcast with a Debussy arabesque, really pretty. Chopin, Debussy, and Rachmaninoff are my favorite composers.
They're so good.
Yeah, and they have three wonderful. Well, since we're on it, wonderful ingredients: the power of Rachmaninoff, the lacy embellishments of Chopin, and that impressionistic Monet stuff of Debussy, and a lot of those influence my arrangements. But when I'm playing for myself, I go to the classical pieces that I like, and I read stuff that I just read through it, even stuff that I may never be able to play. Some of Rachmaninoff is just frankly beyond me. Just is. But I love saying, so that's how he did it. Figure it out, you know, and put on your detective hat and say, how did he make that sound? And it's kind of a fascinating game for me. So yeah, so when I'm not playing my arrangements, I'm looking at classical stuff, some knuckle busters.
If you had to pick a favorite of your arrangements to play, what would that be?
Would be Somewhere in Time. I have two. The theme from that movie it's gentle and beautiful, and I often play it in conjunction with All I Ask of You from Phantom. The one is, Somewhere in Time is very gentle and transparent. And then Phantom, the way I arrange it, gets bigger and bigger and bigger and powerful. And it's often what I start my show with. And I've been doing that for 30 years, I guess, however long Phantom's been out. So those are two of my favorite arrangements.
Nice. Yeah, I've had a chance to listen to a variety of your pieces. Like I said, I've added your music to my playlists because of what I do. And it's just fantastic. It's so relaxing.
Thank you. Thank you.
What is a book you've recently read that challenged you, a book that inspired you, and a book that you couldn't put down?
Yeah, that was interesting because I love books that are before the 20th century. I like 2 years before The Mast by Richard Henry Dana. I've read that about 4 times, and I take it out every now and then. So I haven't read it recently, but I find myself reading poetry. And I love poetry, And I love Robert Frost. I love William Butler Yeats. And I find myself reading kind of self-improvement stuff. I read some easygoing novels, some thrillers, Tom Clancy kind of stuff as well. But it doesn't stay with me. It's entertainment. And I enjoy it. I mean, it's well written and it's good. But I find myself drawn to books that are self-improvement or motivational, or they're not entertaining, fascinating books, but the things like the Five Love Languages, or things by Rabindranath Tagore, the Indian poet, which is philosophy, things like that. I love Charles Dickens. I've read most of those novels. So I'm kind of a throwback.
Yeah, I understand. I really love, some of my favorite authors are long since gone, such as Oscar Wilde for me.
Oh my, yes. Yeah, that was great. Yeah, and that kind of intellectual humor is delightful to play with. Supposedly he said on his deathbed, "These curtains are killing me."
I'm sure you mentioned it in your book, but I always like to ask people on the show, what is a piece of musical advice that you ignore and one that you'll always follow?
One that I ignore is you have to have training to play Mozart like Mozart, and you have to have training to play Chopin like Chopin. I ignore it because you can't play Mozart the way you play Chopin. But I grew up in the traditional education where they say, Alfred Cortot, for example, is a Chopin expert, and Schnabel is a Beethoven expert. And there's no question they played gorgeously, but how could you possibly play Chopin the way you play Beethoven? So I think play it how it feels that you should play. I ignore strict tempo markings. If there's a metronome marking, I look at it and I probably agree with it most of the time, but I ignore it. And one that I always follow is, to paraphrase it, what would Emile do? Because I want to be who I am whenever I'm at the piano. And if I'm playing it the way, well, my teacher always said you have to play this part this way, or my favorite pianist, Rubinstein or Horowitz or Andre Previn or Oscar Peterson, if they played it that way and I loved it, doesn't mean that I should necessarily do that. And if I find myself, as a matter of fact, if I find myself playing like my impression of my idol, I just don't perform that piece because it's already been done better.
And you bring up a good point about art. And when we create art, we're putting ourselves into it, and we might get little bits of our teachers or other influences. But yeah, you bring up an excellent point about there's a difference between letting that influence you and you put yourself into it versus literally being a carbon copy, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And surprisingly, I find a lot of people who really try. It's understandable when you're young and you're learning. It's great help to imitate somebody. I mean, just plain imitate them because they're the greats. But then at some point you have to shed that. And I don't know about you, but when I left college, it took me a long time to stop being a college student and stop having in the back of my mind what my teacher would say about my playing. I mean, it took me years. And I was already a professional pianist, but I was thinking, what would Dr. Redkay say if I did this? I mean, it just stays with you. I had to change from being a student to being a grown-up who's a professional musician. And it's a mental change that you have to make at some point. Maybe some people do it more easily than I did. I don't know.
And then we become our own teachers.
Yes, that's true.
And along the lines of advice, what's the best advice you've received in your industry?
As far as industry, meaning the business of music, is that I had to find out, lo and behold, music is a business like anything else. And I hated knowing that, but it's just life on earth. And once I think I know so many people, young ones in particular, including myself at the time, that you object to the fact that it's a business. And if you have to, and that's a terrible obstacle, objecting to it. It's like objecting to gravity. I don't like it, but there it is. And the sooner you can understand it's not a bad thing that music's a business, it's just a thing. Music, like anything else, is a business. Painting a beautiful picture of, even Michelangelo sculpting David. Somebody had to pay for it. Somebody had to pay him. He had to eat and he had to sleep. And whether it was a patron or a commissioned piece of artwork or whatever, somebody has to do it. Van Gogh was poor not because he wasn't a great master, but he was poor because he didn't have anybody marketing his stuff. And there's a kind of a tradition that art is discredited if you make it into a business. That's not true. They're two things, but somebody has to market your artwork. I think often even Mother Teresa, maybe the kindest woman in the world, but she had to raise money all the time. You have to have money to help people, to make them better, to do your art. So anyway, I think that's I forget what the question was, but I think it was something as far as the music industry concerned, the fact that it is an industry, and don't balk at that. It's just how it is.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard pill to swallow for many creative types.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It's so counter to the creative instinct. You have something wonderful to say and you say it, and it's just life's good on earth and everything's wonderful, and it's offensive to say how much do you want for that book.
It really goes back into, and I know this has been more popular mindset, is knowing your worth, not being afraid to charge X number of dollars for a lesson because you have a doctorate, things like that.
That's still a thing to this day with so many people, including myself. I have somebody else when I play private events, my wife is my manager, but she's a businesswoman. And when people ask me what it costs for a concert, I say, well, talk to Judy. I mean, it's still uncomfortable for me, but somebody has to do it. And I'm fortunate that my wife can do that.
Do you have any barriers, either internal or external, to reaching where you are in your career?
I feel odd saying this, but the answer is no. I've had hard times like anybody has, but I've never veered for a moment from knowing what it is that I'm supposed to be doing on this planet, and just playing music. And it wasn't like, oh my God, the God spoke to me. No, it's just, that's what I do. Sometimes in LA, I was poor. As I said, I took other jobs, but not much. And I'd rather make a very little bit of money doing what I love than making more money doing something I hated. Saying this, I have to say I feel blessed. I mean, I'm a guardian angel or something, because my whole career has been very happy, very successful, and I've had to worry about money, certainly, but I haven't had to veer from my path.
That's good that you've still been able to do what you love, and that that you were able to make ends meet. I think that's tough sometimes when you are in the creative field and you have to get a second or a third job.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult.
And you think about it, a lot of people do that their whole lives, and they're just having a second or third job just to make ends meet, and they're just jobs. So True. We're fortunate that we have maybe a job that's just an okay job, but in the evening we get to do what we love. It's pretty wonderful.
Completely understand. Yeah, I feel very blessed doing what I get to do too. So if we snuck a peek at your music collection, what are some things we would find? Like, what's one of your most favorite CDs or most obscure albums?
Probably one of my favorite albums, and it's, I don't know if I still have it on vinyl, but I grew up with it, was Joseph Hoffman, concert pianist, playing Moskowski and Godofsky and these finger benders that are crazy difficult and wonderful to hear, and just phenomenal technique. And then I have, because of my dad, when we were growing up, he got Reader's Digest Book of the Month, and they had Records of the Month, and so I heard most of the great popular piano concertos and violin concertos on these monthly issues that he got. So you would see it mostly classical, and then you would see my very first non-classical record ever. I was in college. It was my second year of college when I first bought a non-classical album, and it was James Taylor, Sweet Baby James. And I really liked I found out that there was other music besides classical, and it was great.
It's always interesting to hear what people have to say about their music collections.
Yeah, I still am pretty much I listen to NPR and I listen to classical music. Well, the other thing that I listen to intensely is Oscar Peterson. What a brilliant, brilliant pianist. And his kind of jazz I love.
We're going to dig into a serious question. What is one of the biggest challenges you feel you have right now? And what would you like to do to overcome that?
Well, to be honest, my biggest challenge is I need more self-discipline. I don't know if they have a pill for that to overcome it, but I have a whole catalog of work behind me, and I'm enjoying the other parts of my life, like my family and my friends, and we travel a great deal. And I have to remember, I'm not retired. I may be old enough, but I'm not retired. And because I have a lot of streams and a lot of albums out there, I don't have to work so hard, but I don't want to become a lazy bum, just lazy. I really, the only answer to that, to overcome it, is just Nike, do it, just do it.
And especially if there's more projects that you're interested in doing, I'm sure that fills up your time and keeps you busy.
I come to my studio every morning at about 8:00, and I go home about 7:00 in the evening. And in that time, in the past, I was working on the book. I'm working on a lot of creative arrangements that I intend to, nowadays, instead of doing an album, of course, we're putting one at a time onto Spotify and Pandora and so forth. But that's where my interest is. I do take care of my social media, and I post one video a week and things like that. So I have hundreds of videos out there. So I keep busy. It takes my time. Sometimes I think, what do I do all day? Well, it's mostly at the computer. And then when I go to the piano, I do what I love.
What is something that you wish you'd known when you first started doing music?
I don't know. What that I wish I had known. I guess I wish I had known that from the start that I should take a course in business and actually make a plan. I had never had any plan. I just kept playing the piano. I don't know how to answer that. Because as I said, I've been an almost enchanted life that way. I started playing the piano. I kept playing piano. I took lessons. I got better. I got a job. I got another job. And here I am today, and life is good. And I've been just incredibly fortunate.
Well, maybe it's, I guess, better that you knew what you knew and you didn't know what you didn't know, right?
I guess. I guess.
What is your favorite movie, and what does it reveal about you?
Aha. My favorite movie is The Legend of 1900. And it's not so well known, but it's a wonderful movie about a pianist who's born and on a cruise ship and lives his whole life on that cruise ship, and he's a pianist. Tim Roth plays that part, and it's a brilliant movie because what it says about me is that I like intense, intelligent drama.
I'll have to write that down. Sounds interesting.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Our final question for this time, and I certainly hope to have you back on the show, but our final question, in your own words, what does living a creative life mean to you?
It means that you are happy. It means that everything you do from an authentic viewpoint. So if you wrap up a gift for someone, you do it how you would do it, not how the department store would do it. And if you tell a story, you say it in your own way. And if you love somebody, you love them how you would love them. It's creative and authentic to me are kind of the same thing.
I love that. Excellent. Emile, thank you so much for joining the show. Listeners, please check the show notes for links to his book and his playlists and albums.
Thank you. Thank you, Tammy.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes, or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.